one-story structure, whereas the city administration building, to house all of the space needed, will be a two-story structure is what we're showing here in terms of the footprint. With that, I want to ask Matthew to walk through the circulation and the planting that's gone into this solution. Just go back here.
Great. Well, good evening. This was a very exciting process. It was very dynamic. We had a great time listening to everybody, getting the input from the community, and this is very much a synthesis of all the ideas and thoughts that we got from the community. The circulation was a critical aspect of the master plan, and one of the key features that came out of the public involvement was the motion or the travel lane of Ashfield. And at Ashfield is very important to provide connectivity back out to Maple Street and over to Fair Oaks. We looked at the options of dead-ending Ashfield, and that was not well received by the residents on Ashfield. So Ashfield would continue through the site. Basically what you see in the light gray is all the roadways and parking areas combined. Station Lane would still function as a through connection from Maple Street over to Fair Oaks. And then along the roadways you have convenience parking located back. And the idea behind the convenience parking was that everybody was very passionate about the existing parking that's right in front of the town hall right now. And they wanted to continue that convenience, that simplicity, that small scale character of the parking, and not to have big parking areas with expanses of asphalt. The next thing we looked at was these are the parking in blue. It represents the police functions. That includes the storage of all of their equipment, police vehicles, and that is discreetly, it'll be behind a heavily landscaped barrier just off the Station Lane right there on the backside of the building. Part of that will also be covered and concealed from the view. We did a series of studies looking at parking underneath the building, and we found when we started to drill down and get into the numbers that underground parking was just cost prohibitive for the project. Moving farther to the right, the light blue area, that is the corporation yard, and that's where all the parking of the city vehicles will occur there. It's also where trash will be. There'll be some storage in those areas. And that's an existing paved area. We found that that was the most economical and convenient use of that space. The next thing is shown in yellow are the convenience parking, and this is very much in the character of the existing parking right across the street right now. You can pull right in, you'll be able to enter into the city administration building from either side of the building, and you'll also have parking immediately adjacent to the library. You'll be able to pull in right there. The next thing we looked at really carefully was pedestrian circulation. A lot of the feedback we got from the community was that they wanted this to be a very walkable, multimodal environment. There were comments that it wasn't possible to safely traverse the site from north to south. There were no pedestrian paths, there's no bike lanes, and so we spent a lot of time looking at how to integrate that and provide multiple paths of travel through there, and depending on whatever point you come into. So if you're coming in from Ashfield and you need to get over to Maple and you're on a bike, as you can see, it's pretty easy to do that. You can get straight across. And the other idea behind the pedestrian networks is that there's a variety of pedestrian opportunities. That some of these paths are along the roads and some meander through green parkways, park areas. So you'll have this richness to the pedestrian experience and the bicycles. The next thing we looked at, and one of the major comments too, was that there was no sense of arrival or gateways at the Civic Center right now. And so we identified 3 major gateways, and these we made multimodal once again: the vehicular, the pedestrian, and the bicycle. And these gateways would be embellished with monuments similar to what's existing right now at the train station entry right there, special plantings, lighting, materials which are harmonious with the character of the architecture within Atherton. Then we looked at the green spaces, and we've actually significantly increased the amount of green space. We spent a lot of time also looking at the existing tree canopies. And as Cheryl mentioned, one of the strongest comments we got back from the community was that they really want a central green floor. We provided a series of options that had different configurations of open space, and the idea of a town green just rose to the top. We also talked a lot about the park area right behind the library, and with the siting of the library there's a lot of opportunities to really reactivate that space. Right now, it's kind of off in the corner by itself, but by providing a relationship with the building, the program of the building could easily flow out and spill into that area, and library functions could come into there, and there could be a really close integration of the uses between those. Existing trees. These are all the existing trees that we'll preserve. We're saving most of the existing trees. We're saving the big deodars right up front. We're saving a lot of the major oaks, which are, as that sign shows, they're an icon of your community. We spent a lot of time looking at those, and actually that really drove a lot of the master plan, much to some people's frustration, I think, at times. But that, we said that you have this tremendous asset right now, and we really need to build upon it, and this is a wonderful place-making element. So the central green area, the town ground green, is all those trees will be preserved in there. And you'll have, what's the beauty of that, is that once that space is built out, you'll have immediate mature tree canopies in there. And then to embellish some of the holes in the tree canopy, where we're going to have some exposed edges of buildings, we're proposing new drought-tolerant, bay-friendly plantings in those areas. And that would be a combination of native trees and shrubs, particularly to screen the police parking facilities, maybe some of the back edges of the library, and then particularly along Fair Oaks, so that when you come in, you have this woodland oak canopy that's very similar to a lot of the roads in this community. Another opportunity exists in that area is that we're going to have to treat all of our stormwater. And so in that area, it's a big, gracious area. There's an opportunity to do some very subtle stormwater gardens in those areas.
Okay, implementation. One of the other things that we thought about pretty carefully, especially as we were considering budgeting the project and how this project would actually be constructed on a site that is going to need to stay active, pretty much the whole time with services for the city. So what you see here is you see the master plan overlaid on the existing site survey, and the buildings in pink or red are the existing structures on the site. And so you can see that we also tried to be sensitive to allowing the library and the city administration and police to essentially stay in place while most of the construction is being done. And so to help the city minimize displacement or the need for temporary facilities or quarters, during the process. This isn't necessarily exactly how it may transpire, but what we wanted to do was see what we could do in the planning to give the city the most flexibility when it comes to phasing and cost decisions when the project moves down the line, and making sure that the city can effectively manage the budget for this project. So speaking of budget, here's an overview of the proposed budget for the plan that you've just been walked through. The city administration building is coming in at $21.9 million. Now, just to mention, these are project costs, which include both the hard construction costs and all the soft costs. So the budget figures that you're seeing are intended to serve as a complete budget for doing the project. It's not like this is just part of it, and oh, by the way, there's going to be a bunch of other costs that pop up. The intent, the committee worked very hard on really working with us to fine-tune and massage this budget and make choices. So you've got a budget of $31.8 million, 21.9 dedicated to the city administration building, and 9.9 dedicated to the library. These do include both building and site development costs allocated to each of the main buildings that are being constructed. And then in terms of the city revenues that are brought to the table to this project from the library fund and from the CDD fund, the Community Development Fund, Those offset the fundraising target, and it brings the city to a target for the private money to be raised at just 19.8 million. So this is the budget which the project has suggested and recommended going forward with, and I know that it's the committee's intention to manage the project very carefully, and from this point forward have the project be budget driven to meet these targets. In terms of what formed the basis for this budget, how did we come up with these numbers? I just got a few backup slides to kind of walk you through what they're based on, so you understand how big is the project, what's going into it, what's the idea here. So you'll see each of the new structures proposed, the city administration building, the library building. This is the amount of space that we identified during our planning process is needed. So you'll see a total building area for the city administration building that's about 25,000 square feet, a little over. You see the little tiny outbuilding that's kind of behind the city administration building. There is a need for some storage for the police department that doesn't have to be in the main structure, so there's also a small accessory building structure that goes along with it at about 1,300 square feet. These figures are modest growth over a lot of what's here now. The police department is enlarged the most because it had the greatest need, was the most undersized. But everything else is in keeping with earlier studies that had already looked at these facilities all the way back from the Blue Ribbon Task Force report. So everything has built forward to developing these figures in order to base this project on. The library, in terms of their assessment, is at a 9,000 square foot building. And the public works yard is currently 2,000 square feet, and as I mentioned earlier, as part of the budget planning, we're simply maintaining that existing structure in place. So there's no additional costs associated with replacing that structure in the public works yard. Then we have about 37,000 square feet of developed parking and yards, secure yard areas and whatnot that are also part of the site development of the project. The other thing I had mentioned is what's happening with this building and how did that end up in the planning. Because of kind of some of the mixed feelings about it, but a desire to not destroy it and not make a decision that the city can't go back on or decide in the future, this building itself and any work to it is included as a potential additive alternate to the project. So should a donor come forward, should there be a consensus within the city during design that there's a function that's important to go in this building and the city would like to invest in this building. We did develop a budget for it. It's a little over $2 million. It is in the plan, it remains in the plan and fits in with the planning for the master plan. And so it's available as an option as this project goes forward. Or it can simply be left in place and the city can continue to use this building however you choose to going forward and make decisions as you go along what renovations you will do. The other thing in terms of strategizing this budget that the committee worked hard on is working with us to keep the budget modest, but then identify a series, again, of additional alternates that could be brought to the project. Should conditions be favorable or there be an important issue that someone really wants to add in. And these include things like photovoltaic panels, replacing the public works yard buildings that we're keeping at the moment, maybe adding additional site amenities, if the budget, precludes some things that people may want to do, public art. So there's a number of things that have been identified and some allowances identified in the budget. Should some additional monies become available or priorities shift, there's some information there for the city to utilize in choosing some potential alternates. And then finally, this is kind of a summary of how did you know how much something was going to cost? Well, using kind of construction dollars on the market conditions today and projecting forward. We worked with the committee to identify that a likely construction start might be mid-2015. We've assumed an 18-month construction schedule. As I've mentioned, this is a complete budget, which includes all the costs necessary to execute this project. And we made some assumptions about a level of quality. These are going to be, 50-year civic buildings. They should be commercial level construction, not residential construction, things like that. So all of these kinds of factors were thought about, and the budget that's been developed is based on some of this background detail that we did work with the committee on refining. So that's pretty much what we had to present in terms of describing the master plan to all of you. And I think in closing, the next steps, and I think those are some of the things that you're requested to act on tonight. The next steps being preparing an environmental impact report for the project, initiating the design and the capital campaign would be the next steps forward. So.
Back to me, you've also got Steve Dust out here, the chair of the CCAC committee, who may like to make a few statements.
I just wanted to say supportive comments to the team. So I just want to say that I'd like to convey it's been a pleasure working together with our site planners and with staff and with residents. It's been a great job. I think staff has done, this has been a little different than prior iterations. This has been a staff-led project, and we had to learn how to do that, and it's worked very, very well. The master plan you saw is not set in stone. It's meant to be a concept that we'd like to see through, but if the town decides to go ahead with the next phase of site planning, things will move around. Buildings will change shapes, and one of the things that we've been charged to do if we go forward, I think, will be to re-examine square footages, make sure they're right. I think what you saw, I would just emphasize what Cheryl said, that we had a lot of feedback from the town, and what impressed me, I attended several of the meetings and of the large public ones, and what impressed me was that frequently there was 70 to 80% consensus on what people wanted. I expected much more division. People were fairly united, and the comments were very insightful and helpful. If you proceed, as George reminded me to say tonight, he foreshadowed, this is a budget-driven project. We know that the way we could kill it the quickest is to have the budget go too big and have it become seen as something beyond what is appropriate for our town. So we're very, very focused on designing a project that fits a budget that we believe is achievable. And lastly, we think this will be a very successful project if you decide to proceed. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions from council to either Steve or to Alden? Councilmember Lewis.
I did, so the underground garage component, is that something that we're just completely throwing out, or is that something that could, if somebody felt that they wanted to fund it?
I think what we're going to try to do, the null hypothesis is no underground garage.
Right.
But what we're going to try to do, if council proceeds, so all my comments, so I don't say that 1,000 times, everything's assuming you decide to proceed, we would pick a time frame, 90 days or 120 days, or maybe as much as 6 months, while we're out the fundraising people are out fundraising. Some of whom serve on the CCAC, but in a different capacity would fundraise. If we were out and we got an interest in funding underground parking, we would try to have the design process be able to accommodate it and not delay things.
So first off, great job. It looks terrific, and a lot of hard work went into it, and you've made a lot of great improvements since we had the council review, and so the finalization looks terrific. I just had a couple questions. One was on the parking. Of course, 6 months ago, of course, there's no need for any parking here because there was very few people here during the day. And so, you know, it didn't count all the spots, but today if you go out there with all the construction, you know, there is the construction teams that park there and the buses that take them around. So is there going to be, or have you guys counted the number of parking spots and made sure that we've accommodated not only the traffic that's going to be here and at the library, but also to accommodate that? So that's question one. Next, when I looked at the flow, it looked like, as you know, today you can go from Maple and you can take a left and get onto Fair Oaks, which is the only way to get out, really, if you need to take a left-hand turn safely onto El Camino. And it looks like now there's like little, you know, you're driving like lots of loops to get there. And and it looked, you know, today, of course, it goes straight out, and I didn't know if there was any consideration not to redesign your traffic, but to have it one way to continue out so that those people could go out, so that's question 2. Question 3 is on the library costs. They just seemed high, given what library costs looked like just a year or so ago when we were gonna build a 10,000 square foot library versus 9,000, and it was gonna cost $7 million, and that was actually architectural. There's a substantial architectural design. And then lastly, this building here, so are the council chambers going to move over to the administrative building?
The way it's currently proposed, there is an open area within the new building for council chambers. This building could be, as Cheryl mentioned, repurposed as the multipurpose room for the library or reconnected in some other way.
Yes, that's what I was getting to, because, you know, depending on the library, at one time we talked about this being, even though it's not necessarily connected, it could be a community center that the library funds could also participate in, because the library would, you know, could have events here as well as other opportunities. So, because this is, people have said that this is a seismically unsafe building, and it's difficult for us to continue to have meetings here, knowing that where everybody else is safe and not us.
Right. Perhaps Cheryl could address the parking flow and library costs.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
So in terms of the library costs first, one of the things you're not really seeing is there's site development costs apportioned to both the admin building and the library. And so some of what you're seeing is there's a burden of site development costs that's been allocated to the library, which is probably what's making that cost look a little bit skewed. It is gonna look like more than just the building costs alone, because we worked with staff to kind of figure out what's an appropriate apportionment for the library's responsibility, because we have to bring in likely all new utilities. There's quite a lot of stormwater development, street development, parking development that is going to be shared by all the facilities here. And so we worked with staff to decide how much should then be apportioned to the library portion of the cost.
Can I pitch in on that? Sure.
Yes.
So I think the thing to keep in mind is when the library was going to the park, I don't know that they had, I wasn't a part of that, but I'm gonna make the leap that they didn't have extensive site costs, that they were building it next to some parking, and they weren't rerouting streets around it. When the decision was made by the town's voters to bring the library back to the town center, we could have stayed in this configuration. But when we went out and had minimal site costs, but when we went out and surveyed the town, they wanted a town center. They want a town green. And that required extensive site rework. So I'm agreeing with Cheryl, but I think that's what drove it.
So it's the site costs associated.
Site costs,
Okay,
yeah.
fine. Okay,
Yeah.
because that wasn't clear from the breakout. Of course,
Yeah, so we
obviously.
didn't really break it down further, but that's really what bumped that up.
Okay.
On
Because
the-
if we
on
don't
the-
spend all the library money, we actually need to buy books for the library as well, and that comes out of that fund.
On the exiting, we can both maybe answer on the exiting. They had a traffic engineer look at the exiting out to Fair Oaks, and they have now moved that curb cut from right where that funnel is, you know, the blender, whatever people call it. They've now moved it away from there. So it actually should be significantly safer where it's going to move to. It may calm traffic because it's not a, straight through from Maple. And so those folks who are kind of through are probably gonna drive a little slower. And the people coming from Asheville probably will too, but it'll be safer to actually get onto the Fair Oaks.
And then there's the parking count.
The parking count is, and you guys might have to help me with the construction piece of it. As we were going through the process, we were not specifically considering the construction parking. We were really focusing on the program need for all of the buildings and facilities on this site. The parking is less, there are fewer spaces shown on our master plan than exist now. And so, I would just say if you're experiencing all that space filling up, then no, we have not shown enough parking on the master plan to accommodate the construction parking as shown. I think what Steve said earlier about this being a roadmap and flexible, I think should the city decide as you go through the design process that you simply need more surface parking, absent doing underground parking, you could see on the plan too that you could still preserve the essence and the priority that we focused on, which was the town green and the preservation of the trees, and have other pockets of area that you could develop for more parking. So, that's sort of the way we went about the priorities for parking on this.
Do you know the number difference?
We're like
We're down 60 spaces.
so we're down 60
But
spaces.
the thing that I want to emphasize too is that we looked at all the programs for each department. And we have numbers, so police department needed 19 spaces. The planning department needed 6 spaces, the library needed, I think it's 12 or 13 spaces. And we were able to meet all of those on the site plan that you see right now. So where you might experience a parking shortage is an evening like tonight. If you've got all the staff here, you have a big town hall meeting, maybe there's something going on in the library, then you might start to experience overflow parking issues and just not having enough parking. The other thing we're going to show too is right now you've got a lot of on-street parking, particularly along in front of the library, and you could size the roads to accommodate that. We showed 90-degree tuck-in parking, which is a bit safer. You get off the road, you don't get it's like with the food trucks. You get that kind of-
Yeah.
Well, thanks
Is that all
very
your
much.
questions?
Yeah, that was it, great job, thank you.
Any other council member with questions? I had some of the similar questions because of the Caltrain, if we in fact get our daily service back, that would increase it. And so my concern is that hence we get more parking. Are we gonna be able to widen roadways? Is that one of our options to create that parking issue? I thank you for answering that, and Bill, thank you for also bringing that up. And the second question I had was, have we actually had the town arborist look at all the trees in the master plan?
Yes, we had an arborist report, so we had all that information from day one.
I would just add one thing. The area that nobody had strong feelings about what it should be is right here. The green space, I don't have my map, but the one that's behind the library.
Right.
Yeah, originally we showed a beautiful park with gazebos and people said, don't do it. Why are you gonna do that? We don't need a town green and that, and over Palmer. So that is kind of the bonus room of the plan.
It's an option.
We need to do something different. We wanted to keep Public Works away from it. Residents, we started to move it to create a straight through street that aligned with the other side, and then it's cost money. And people didn't dislike where Public Works were today, so we'll just leave it. Yeah. But that's kind of your bonus room in this house, where if you needed something different, that's where you go.
People didn't want Public Works next to the housing on
Right.
Maple.
Right.
That was very
Exactly.
But it wasn't a strong thing because there's not a lot going on there. So it wasn't, we don't want to move it, I don't want to misrepresent that. We're happy where it is. But there's a big space here it's got a lot of, we've got all those redwoods that are going to stay.
Right.
And they're gorgeous, but they're shady. And it's kind of,
I think they could be pruned.
anyway.
Great for parking.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead,
So
please.
just to reiterate, you did say it, but I just want to focus on it. This is at a high level, and there are granular changes that will absolutely happen as we get into this. That may well include Reading Park and what is done with that space, because it's not well defined.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to clarify is that in the budgeting basis and assumptions, the alternatives page that you have in your presentation, you have the bullet item, additional site upgrades and amenities. You don't have an underground parking
We don't.
bullet.
I believe staff has the data of what that roughly priced out at. It's huge. And so certainly staff will have that if someone wants to go back and re-explore it. It can be looked at more closely if there are some design ideas being developed.
But, so in looking at that underground parking, it was always looked at that it would include the secure parking for the
Correct.
police,
Correct,
which elevated the cost significantly, as I
yes,
recall.
yes.
But I don't think it was ever really seriously looked at if the police parking were to remain above ground and there was to be underground parking that wasn't secure.
I think that,
I can answer.
go ahead.
That wasn't what drove the cost, right?
Right.
It said if you build the EOC above a parking garage, the parking garage has to meet a 1.5 standard versus a 1.0 standard.
Yeah, what you get.
That's what drove it. It wasn't the use as a police
No.
garage. And that's also expensive because
Right.
security and everything else. It's gotta have its own it's gotta have all kinds of things that you don't need otherwise. But it was an assumption they made that the entire project, that a whole building had to be built to a 50% higher level.
Right, and that's
And so-
because
yeah.
of the police department and the code requirements for an essential services facility. And when you go into design, whereas you might be able to lay out the building in such a way that you could put, joints in it or something so you don't have to make the whole building to that standard, it's really difficult to put an underground parking garage that forms the foundation of the entire building and not bring it to that level of code compliance. So it
just
just.
so
But as we said
everyone-
before, we can-
EOC, can you?
We can look at it.
EOC?
If a fundraiser goes out and gets a big gift, and they're really focused on, we wanna get that underground parking, we will try to value engineer a way to bring the cost into a budget we can make.
Because it's,
Elizabeth's got it.
So you're saying that it would cost like 32 million if we had underground, you said 50% higher cost for the administration
there's,
building?
on page
Apologize.
32 of the agenda packet is your detailed cost analysis, and it talks about alternate number 2, underground garage. You know what that is? It's like, it says add to base bid 7.89 million. So it's on page 32.
On 32. Sorry.
Well, 43 of your packet, it's actually page 43 of your packet.
And it's not clearly the EOC that is driving
Right,
this,
it's-
actual police department, EOC's Emergency Operations Center.
And
That's just a component.
and that's for like the
It's-
maximum underground garage. I mean,
Right, that's the other thing to point out is we took that footprint and we maximized to get the largest underground parking garage that we could, which was larger than the building footprint you saw in the master plan. So it's another point to mention is, that was, obviously if you're gonna do it, you wanna get the most, for your dollar and the most underground parking you can house. But that, you don't have to do that if should you decide to investigate it further either. So, there are a lot of things that went into building up to that very high cost that at this stage, it just didn't seem prudent to force it into the master plan and its budget, and rather, hold it aside and let the process flesh out whether or not it comes back on the table.
I think Lisa had a comment as well.
Lisa,
Yes,
please.
so if you decide to proceed, I'll be preparing a request for proposal for the environmental document and analysis. And what I would appreciate is that if there's anything you think you might want to add in later, tell us now, we can put it on that add alternate list, and that way I can have the environmental analysis analyze the biggest possible project you can think of, so we're not gonna have to come back later. So it could be that underground garage or 60 net additional parking spaces is an option for the environmental consultant to consider, and then we won't have to go back later.
Oh, that's a very.
I don't mean details, but kind of the big.
Apologize. Might I ask another question related to that, because I think they're two linked. Did we analyze what potential parkings we could gain by utilizing that park area, if you want to call it, reading park area?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get an idea if in fact
Did
there
you
are 60
mention-
parking spaces.
Yeah, just a quick count, you're probably gonna generate, another 20, 30 spaces. But you're gonna, it's a trade-off of losing green space and,
Yeah.
there's also,
Parking's a pretty-
the site plan was very much generated, parking is located right by the front doors. And
Right.
that was a very strong preference that we heard.
Well, the other thing on the site plan is the way you've designed it is you've actually buffered the houses around
Yes.
here. And so if we're gonna take up that space, now suddenly we're putting a parking lot in somebody's side yard, which I
Right.
think is, they're not gonna be very happy about.
Right,
But
right.
The way you guys have done it so far, realize that maybe we're short some spaces, but you've really done a great job of shielding the neighborhood from what they could perceive is gonna be a noise generator for them.
Basically, the big idea is the buildings sit in the middle, protect the trains, keep the train noise away from the residents.
Questions? Yeah. So, any other questions? Rick?
No.
Nathan?
I'm good.
Perfect. Seeing no other questions,
Thank you.
any questions from the, comments from the public? I apologize at this time. Great, come on up.
Great job. I'm Greg Conlon, 43 Virginia. I'm just concerned about the Public Works building. It's gonna be off-cycle. I don't know how old it is now, but, once you get this one done, that one's gonna be a lot older, and And the people that are in it, I'm not sure whether they're gonna feel like they're second-class citizens. But I just don't know how big it is, but if it's less than 2,000 feet, I think you could bring it into the big building for less than 10%. So I just, it's just a thought. I'm sure it has been considered, but my gut, and it's closer to the train tracks than anything else, so it's gonna be very noisy, you know, going down the track. If we get the number of trains they're talking about, and heaven forbid the high-speed rail. So, I mean, you got them right on the tracks.
I can clarify something there.
Please, Cheryl.
Yeah, so the only building that we're actually saving is the storage shed that houses the public works equipment. So that 2,000 square foot building that's there now is housing their equipment, you know, mostly their materials, equipment and stuff.
So it's not people?
It's not people. We did move all the people into the administration building.
All right, I just,
Good point.
Sorry about that.
Very good point.
Thank you for adding that clarity. Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public comments. Bring it back to council members, final comments. I will let you do it. Any other comments, Councilman Whitmer? I will say, I just want to make one comment. I'm, as reading this, one was the professionalism and the amount of detail and the amount of outreach and the amount of commitment from the CCAC group, and you was just tremendous. And it shows in the effort to get it to this point. I was really pleased to read, and I think it got beat into my head multiple times, a budget-driven project. I mean, how many times do you hear in a public project that a project's budget-driven? So I get it, and I'm glad you have it there, and I hope as we move forward in the menu process that we can work with, be pleased to, if adding to this is something that the public wants and that we can afford to do, if we could afford to do it, that was just nice to read. So again, thank everybody, the CCAC group and the consultants for your efforts to this point. Do I have a motion on the table?
I'd like,
Oh,
no, go ahead.
comment?
I want to reiterate what Carrie said. I think we've had a tremendous effort here by our citizens who have served on the CCAC, by the many residents that participated in this outreach effort, and by the leadership from HMC and from the staff. I really think it's been a great effort. I think that the outreach that was done on this Civic Center project is a model for how we as a town need to move forward as we find our resources at the point where we